Wissam, it is awesome to see you. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today. We are going to get into that really interesting topic around the intersection between AI and revenue, or AI and sales. Before we do it, what's something that you're working on right now that gets you super excited in the context of AI?
Well, it's got to be Truebase. I kind of immerse myself into the sales journey and how B2B can close customers. And it kind of, as you know, Mike, it keeps varying, right? Like what worked yesterday or last month doesn't necessarily work now. And how can you really, because I'm a technologist at heart, how can you apply technology to solve these problems at scale? So that's kind of what Truebase is all about, my current company, and why I try to spend most of my waking hour thinking about.
Why do people struggle with embracing, or do people struggle with embracing technology to enable themselves to do better things?
Well, every company I've been part of is like, you always find the product team, right? And their titles are engineering. And there's the salespeople, and there's I've yet to work in an organization that have an engineer or that kind of any kind of somebody help them make things a little bit faster with technology as part of their charter, right? What you usually have, you have what I like to call the tinkerer, right? This is Charlie, who is really good with technology, but he's not an engineer, but he knows how to set things up for the team. And they get to use what's out there in terms of technology, right? And they might able to get little bit some help with technology. But overall, it's, even though we're using software and we're clicking on a mouse and wherever, it's just really step up of manual work, right? We just move the paper, put it on the screen, and that's kind of sometimes the level of technology. It's still, some people still use phones and cold emails and whatever, but there's a lot more depth to the technology that could be utilized to really speed our work up. Now, if you look at all the tools out there, they kind of want to target the lowest denominator, right? They don't want to go into, every team formation is different, their processes are different. If they want to build that customization for you, it becomes too complicated to sell, to produce, right? So it's not really good business to be in. So what do? They kind of track all these minimum denominator that I mentioned, and they have generic software, and you go figure, right? And it's do you think you're automating because you're using software, but there's a lot more potential that you're missing out.
What's the difference between someone who knows how to use technology versus someone who is an engineer and knows how to engineer, or thinks about it from an engineering perspective? How would you describe the difference between the two?
Well, if you think of engineering principles, usually, or good engineer, the way they think, if I do something more than once the same way, then they're thinking, how can I automate that, right? Which is a very different mindset, because for non-engineers, they show up to work, they're expecting to do the same thing over and over, right? They don't have the tool set, or they don't have the technology, or they don't even know it's possible to do that, right? And to be fair, in some cases, writing two emails, yeah, you're true, writing two different emails, but they're also very different. The prospect is different, right? Or the problem or the objection might be different. So there's a lot of a human that needs to weigh in into that. But at the end of the day, it does a lot of the work become repetitive, manual, and tedious. And that's without the engineering mindset to automate things, it's kind of really hard, right? That's really the difference, to answer it shortly. Yeah.
It brings to mind for me one of the things that we kind of create in our school systems, or even if you go back to Henry Ford and the assembly line, there's this right, where we've engineered automation to happen in the context of a human automatically doing some of those things. And then some of that's been transformed over to a machine, and now some of it is being transformed into other portions of technology. But there's this there's the management aspect of how do we, when thinking through use of human resources, having human resources continue to go in and do those repetitive tasks that could be managed on a data sheet becomes a way for people to determine where can we become more efficient, how can we optimize in this area, how can we make sure that people are doing their jobs, and when they're not doing their jobs, we either replace them or we find other jobs for them to do that are a little bit more effective. So it's almost like there's this, we've designed the way that we operate as business to support more of the having people do repetitive tasks rather than having people think about engineering their roles for success. Is that fair?
That's fair, but I almost like I've heard this often, and that's a lot of how people might look at this.
Yeah.
You'd be like, they are thinking automation or AI replacing jobs, right? Like, but there's, I think, an in between, and there's like, how can it help you? How can automation or AI make you way more efficient doing your job? And I think that's a very different mindset. I like how kind of Microsoft and others coined the word like co-pilot, right? Like, how can it come and assist you in what you're doing very, very efficiently? And I think that's kind of truly the ultimate way. That's the right balance, right? Some stuff are always done better by a human. Sometimes, like, putting the right information in front of you and asking you to choose between the A and the B, that's also super helpful, but you didn't have to, and that saved you a lot of time. So there is an in-between to think about that, and that's how I start really like warming up and thinking about it. So it's not there to take your job, it's just there to make you do way more efficient.
So, but how do we help people see that? How do we help people look at tools like this as an enablement tool rather than a replacement tool?
Yeah, well, that's kind of like, that's a challenging problem. Like, are you talking from an organization perspective and leadership? Like, how do you roll out automation into your organization?
No, I think, I mean, let's start at the individual. Let's start just kind of like at an endpoint level, like the people who are doing the work. How can the individual think differently about leveraging technology to enable them to do better stuff, do better, find the value in having a co-pilot working with them rather than thinking about in the context of this is going to replace me.
Right. Well, I think there's a few things to approach this. One you can say, be like, your competitor is doing that, whether your teammate, whether they're different company, they're doing that and they have ahead of you. So it's like, if you really want to be relevant, unfortunately, I will say it, fortunately and unfortunately, I will say it, like, you have to adapt. You cannot do it. Like, imagine if you say, I don't know, like, will be a good example, but I don't want to use my laptop and I use desktops, right? Why? Because so you're bound. Every time you have to go home and do things on your desktop, right? Like, you'll be at a disadvantage doing that, right? So the same thing apply here. If you're not tooling up, right, then other people will come and do your job better, and you'll be left behind. So that's one way to think about it. The other way is like, change and technology, it could be always overwhelming. Like, this is a human being. Every time there's something new, people are always, their first reaction is to resist it, right? And I think that sometimes differentiate, are you open? Are you quickly able to say, is this for me? Is this not? Is this important? Is this not? And that sometimes go far in making you ahead in your career.
I think that's a really powerful perspective as you go through this and say, and I'm just realizing for everybody who's been listening this far, I had my wrong microphone turned on. So thanks for bearing with that for the first couple of minutes there. The looking at the technology and the difference between desktop and laptop as an example is a really powerful one. I'm not going to lug around my desktop. And if you remember way back when Apple launched their first versions of the Apple, like the Apple II, they had big carrying cases that looked like igloos, looked like flexible igloos that would allow you to put the machine in there, and you could move the monitor and you could move the machine, you could move all of the pieces. And nowadays you see people move desktop machines like an iMac. They'll move that around, but it's so much more powerful when you can take your MacBook Pro and have the same kind of operating environment on an airplane that you'd have inside your desktop environment. The other area where you see this happen is, think about a situation where you have a socket wrench as an example. This where I don't have to completely take the wrench off of the bolt or off of the nut in order to ratchet it down, where with a box wrench, I'm going to have to take it off of the nut or off of the bolt. So these are examples of technology that help humans perform. When we look at these technologies, like Wissam is talking about, the AI specifically, and use it as a tool to help us perform, our perspective starts to shift, and we can start to think about what are the different jobs to be done of that tool that enable us to be more effective. Is that fair?
That's definitely. I mean, I will like recap this to be like, how can you do more, right? With the what are you bound to? What's the most sacred thing you have is your time, right?
Yes.
How can you do more with little time, or as much time or less time, right?
Absolutely. And you can, and when you think about it from an engineering solutions perspective, your view of the challenge starts to shift. So when I say the word design, what comes to mind for you?
Software design, or like, sorry, can you tell me more about design?
Just anything. When you're designing a solution, what goes into designing a solution, or designing workflow, or designing an integration, or designing for success? Like what comes to mind for you when the word design comes up?
We've been, especially engineers, are trained to, like, there's systematic thinking. Like, what is the problem? What is the root cause of the problem? What are the possible solutions? And that's your design, right? What are the pros and cons of each, right? Pick the best alternative, put an execution plan, and get it happen, right? Those, like, I can apply this when I'm talking to a friend about a problem or about like something that I'm trying to improve, right? This is systematic thinking. I know it sounds very robotic, but it's very powerful. You don't have to think about twice how to approach this, right? And yeah, sometimes actually you list the alternative and be like, doing it exactly the same you're doing it is the right way to do it. And that's also is peaceful sometimes, right? To know that.
Why do people struggle? Why do people who don't have a background in systems thinking struggle with the idea of taking a systematic approach to thinking?
Like, I don't know if everybody is trained to think this way, right? Like, I also think that there's always a learning curve, that once you start up, like, you can boil down everything to your own operating system. By the way, this systematic thinking might work well for me. It might not work well for you, right? It might not be how you make decisions, right? So everybody is like, you go through your career and you end up developing this operating system that's very unique to you. You also know what's your strength and weakness. And now it becomes all pattern recognition. You know, I've been to this situation. I know I dealt with it like that before and it didn't work. Now I know how to do better. And I apply my principles, right? I think the one thing to mention here, the more you are open, right, the more you can evolve that operating system that you're building that's unique to you, right? The more that's able to make better decisions. So that's one way to think about it. So that's why I think able to write things down, process, retrospective, lesson learned, and evolve. That's that iteration process. Quite honestly, that's how you build a business, but that's also how you build a career for yourself.
And it's how you go through even building dinner for your family at night. Right. Like, these are things you may not realize that you're actually doing this, but you are in one way, shape or form. It's whether it's getting prepared for dinner, or trying to determine what kind of workout you're going to do, or building out your business, or building out a program. These are things that we go through. I'll share an example with some. I'd love to hear your feedback on this. And if we were to, or is the process of going to a grocery store, is there a process that you can apply to going to the grocery store to pick up a dozen eggs? Is there a repeatable process that we apply each time we go to the grocery store to pick up either eggs or milk or whatever it is that we're picking up? Would you believe that there is a process?
I believe there is. You can approach this in multiple angles.
Okay.
Right? And I think that's what you're getting into, right? Like some people go to the grocery store and they justify it. It'll be like, you know what? I want to get out of the house. I want to interact with people. I think eggs, you cannot smell them, but I want to touch what I'm buying, right? And that's important to them. And that, like, great, there's no right or wrong answer, go, right? Or I like to go to this store, even though it's further, because I do get that experience intensified, right? And there's others like me, it'll be like, you know what? This is not where I wanted to spend my time. For me, it's a click on an app, and I want things at my doorsteps, right? So that is different. There is no right or wrong answer. It's what's right for you, right? Some others be like, maybe price really matters, or they have to be fresh from, like from a farm. And they also, like, everybody has a different priorities. So even though the question is the same and the outcome are eggs in your fridge, right? There is multiple way to think about this.
Yes. And I love the view on multiple ways to think about it, multiple ways to think about why and how. And then based on the why and the how, you can start to determine next logical steps and start taking those. So is the process grab the keys, walk through the door, open the car, turn on the ignition, back out of the driveway, drive down the street, make a left turn, make a right turn, and kind of work through that process to get to the grocery store? Or is the process as simple as going to Amazon or Whole Foods or wherever, whatever service you want to use to have the resources delivered to you? And I really like the highlight on being able to prioritize what's most important to you. What's the experience you're trying to create? On either side, you've got the clarity around what you're trying to accomplish and why it's important to accomplish it. The how can change depending on the different variables that are incorporated, the humans that are involved, the technology that's involved, the timing for which something needs to be done. If I need eggs in 15 minutes, I'm probably better off getting in the car and going and getting them. If I need them tomorrow, I can probably get them delivered later today.
Exactly. And Mike, it doesn't have to be like, once you have your priority, your values written down, right? All these decisions become at a certain point mechanical, right? Most people have not took the time to think about what is the value, what's my priority, what is more important than the others, right? What do I value more? Is it my time? Is it my dollar? Is it my well-being, in terms of the X analogy here, right? I think, and by the way, those also change and evolve. So if you have really in your operating system a way to keep writing those down often and checking in, see, are those truly, they still stack in the right way? And is this the right priority for me? By the way, this is exactly what companies do. Building a company is no further than that. Just you're building a company of one right now, and that's you, or a company of your family, right? But it's like as not very nice to say like business and personal life, but they're really kind of, it's all the same concept.
Why is it always the same concept?
Because it all comes down to, to the same thing. It's like, this is what I'm trying, like, if you have the vision of where you want to be, who you want to become, right? Now, if you're talking individual organization, it's kind of, a lot of it is the same. It might change differently. It might change, like one of them might be more financial, career, market kind of, right? And the other one could be like better dad, better husband, or, more healthier person. But it's the same mechanics, right? It's like, here's my target, here's my vision, here's how I want to get it done. Those questions, the how and the why and the what, they are the same questions, that the answer might vary.
Yes. And it's, I think, to the point that we were talking about a little bit earlier around design thinking and thinking in the context of systems and engineering solutions. There are people who haven't had access or haven't thought through it in this manner, and they will say, this is not me. This is not how I approach things. And I think just in the course of the conversation that we've had today, whether talking about eggs or talking about, and we'll get into this, the intersection of AI and sales here in just a minute, it really is a function of identifying some of those key guiding principles, key decision criteria, and prioritization. What do you rank over something else? And if you take the time to just kind of work through anything that you're working on right now and write it down, like Wissam has been talking about, you'll start to identify some patterns there. You'll identify patterns around kind of like, what problems do you like to solve?
Right.
Why do you like to solve those? Which ones don't you like to solve? Which ones suck energy out of you? What kind of relationships do you like to be in? And you can kind of, things start to become a bit binary in these discussions if you ask the right question. So let's talk about prompts and AI. What is a prompt?
A prompt is actually a new interface, right? That you can interact with technology. So just think of like how we just did the desktop analogy and the laptops, and there was a mobile, and then now there's a new way, which is basically there's a one little input box where you can type whatever you want, and you're interacting with very large technology behind the scene, and that's a prompt.
And how will prompts help the non-tech get better at interacting with technology? Or how do prompts help the non-technical person get better in interacting with technology?
It actually helps a lot. That's really a big part of the generative AI or the chat GPT of the world, that it almost got put in the hands of the masses really fast, really quick, because it's no longer, you don't have to have high level of training like coding to go and get something useful of a machine, right? Or for software, which was the case, right? You have to so software engineers for the longest time, they were able to do things because they know how to write programming language, and they go to schools and all of that to really learn how to do something. Now we're saying, you know what, that's okay. You don't have to be, you don't have to know how to write the instructions in specific details. Just speak like you're speaking to a friend. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? Tell me a little bit more information about you, just like the way you and I talking. And I mean, there's a voice enabled prompt. We can go there, but but for right now, write it down. Just say, who do you think you are? What is it trying to accomplish? Give me a little bit more data. And you have access to very large technology behind the scene that can really give you value in what you're trying to accomplish.
What are some common mistakes that people are making when thinking about prompts?
Now, because it's a tool that's really easy to use, right? So I'll do the analogy, like imagine you have a hammer, right? Well, you can build a small box, you can build a whole house, right? We both have the same tool. But what can you do with it, right? And at what cost and at what speed, and how much of this is repeatable? So as simple as it sounds, yeah, I can talk to a friend. Yeah, I can go talk to a friend. But how much value can you get at what cost and all of that? That's where it's a little bit naive to say what value can you really get with it, right? So even though you can play with it, you can feel like you can hammer something, right? But can you really build the house, right? And that's kind of sometimes like the disconnect of you feel like I know how to use a hammer. That does not mean you know how to build a house.
Are you finding that companies think they know how to build a house when the reality is they're still trying to figure out how to use a hammer?
I think right now at this point, they're learning that there's a new tool called Hammer, right? And they don't know, should we buy it? Should we build it? Should we train our existing employees how to use it? Should we use a vendor that claim they have that tool? I think at this point, they really don't know. All what they know is that they've seen few snippets of what it can do, and they are blown away of what it can do. And all what they know is that they're getting a lot of pressure from everywhere, bottom up, top down, peer, competition, industry. They are hearing about it day and night, and they just don't know what's the best way to deploy it in their organization.
How do you go through the process of kind of determining that? Like, what does the process look like to start to explore or start to test or start to figure this out?
Yeah, I think exploring is a very great word to use here, because quite honestly, I don't know what is the best way to go about it. I don't think anybody knows yet. It's too early, right? But I think also is maybe based on the previous conversation, just be open, right? Read that article, watch that demo, have a conversation on a podcast or whatever. Or take a demo from a vendor who is claiming they have that. So just collect information right now and be open in terms of, and start deploying it and playing with it from one use cases or one thing at a time. And form an opinion. And you might fail more often. You might say like, okay, this is great, but do I really have to do copy and paste every time? That's not going to work. Or do I really have to pay, I don't know, engage in a big contract with this vendor? That's maybe not for me right now. So I think right now collecting information is the best thing you can do. So when the time is right and things start really shaping into like, well, that's the way to do it. You have to go buy specific apps to do the specific problem. You're not starting from scratch. You have built an opinion and you know what you can keep up with the conversation.
How do people, how do you tell the difference between those people who are claiming to be applying AI to whatever the thing is that they're delivering versus those who are actually doing it? What are some of the things that you should see to break through the reality of some of those claims?
Yeah, so unfortunately, with any news cycle, we've seen that, and obviously AI in general, before that with everything crypto, before that with everything cloud, like there is 90% of the noise that usually get generated are people are capturing an opportunity in time. How many cold outreach do you reach per day right now that has the word AI, right? Or generative AI, right? Like almost everything. Yeah. By the way, last year, it was the opposite. And I did a LinkedIn poll last year, and because we were an AI company, but I start like almost rolling out the AI messaging of everything we do. It will be like, even though we are an AI company, I just no longer want to talk about that because it was just kind of a negative consequences to my message. Where right now there's a lot of that noise, right? So it's like, it's a cycle, you have to understand it, and that's all positioning. How do you know? I think like learning and using the product is the ultimate way to do it. Unfortunately, with enterprise sales right now, the way it's been done for a while is that everything you have to buy before you try, right? So like you might see a demo, but they lock you into a contract, and then few months and if not few weeks, you discover, be like, this is not working the way I anticipated. And that's really unfortunate. The good news is that there's a lot of, right, this is changing more and more right now because of downturn economy, where even on the sales and marketing, people are buying differently right now. They would like to try it for a few months, try it on their own. They actually now almost going through the whole buying journey and decision making almost on their own, right? And then they're coming back to you to just kind of like the last step. Okay, we want to do this, or give me 10 license or whatever. But also let me also deploy it, roll out deployment. So that's changing, and that's why the ultimate way of trying is like you try to use value, you find value quickly and often, and now you start upgrading. That's a PLG motion right now. That, by the way, existed for a long time, product-led growth. That's what existed for a long time, what I called inside the house, right? Product, engineering, HR, that's how people were buying for the longest time. And right now, that's where sales and marketing, or outside the house, that's where things right now are catching up onto the same buying strategies.
It's fascinating. One of my favorite quotes is, there's nothing new except what has been forgotten. Yet so many times we get ourselves, and it's a Marie Antoinette quote, so many times we get ourselves caught up into this new shiny thing. And when you unpack it and go a bit deeper, you realize it has roots in so many other things, and it has been around for periods of time. And it might be new and shiny in your specific industry, or it might be new and shiny in the way that it's being positioned. And this relates to roles that we create inside organizations. So from a go-to-market team perspective, customer success has existed for years. Like any company that's working with another company, well, any company who's working with another company should want those customers to be successful. And they want those customers to be successful because they'll continue to buy and they'll continue to tell other people about them. And it creates a strong component of their general growth strategy. Yet people look at it today and say, well, customer success is this new thing that we've got to figure out, or at least new thing over the course of the last couple of years after Gainsight started to coin the phrase. When we go through kind of this process that you just talked through, specifically around how people are buying in the enterprise sales space, it sounds to me a lot like the egg discussion, in that there's this last mile piece that needs to get taken care of over a given period of time. And some people might need an assistant, a co-pilot. So sales might act as a co-pilot to help a customer make a decision,
right?
Or a tool like AI or something else that's out there, some kind of enablement technology might act as a co-pilot to help people. How is AI helping, or how are some of these tools that are out there helping revenue leaders, revenue professionals, sales and marketing, success professionals, people who are interacting with customers? How are tools like AI improving the experience that they can create for customers, and how can people leverage these tools a bit better?
Yeah, it can actually help on most of the activities in sales.
Okay.
But obviously in some areas more than the other. But like if you start from like, just top of the funnel, right? Or left to right in discovery, right? So you can now just type into that one little input box and say what you're looking for. Say, I'm looking for customers who can, buy this kind of service, who wants to buy eggs, right? And it will go scout the internet and able to surface that for you really easily. And why is this like kind of better today? Because people portray themselves on the internet in a very different way. You and I could be selling the same service, right? If we both look at our LinkedIn profile, at the company LinkedIn profile, you might have very different industries than the one I have. You might have different keywords in your description than the one I have. Your website might look different than the one I have. If I am a seller and both of those companies are my target buyers, I now have to do a lot of the work to figure out how to find you in my search and how to find the other company and again, you guys are doing the same thing, yet you portray themselves differently. So that's friction. That's tedious work. That's the manual work we're describing. Where right now, the large language models they're trained to really know that, we are the same company, or we both have need to the same product. And right now, not only it bridged that gap, now it's able to say, just describe it in plain English, and we're able to figure all that for you. That did not exist before. That today, from discovery perspective, you have to do filters and Boolean searches, the and the or, and click next for endless time on pages and pages loading. And you have to do all of that. All that burden is on you. So that's one use case is like that. But it goes a lot more. So now staying on the top of the funnel and working our way, then now you do want to do qualification. Well, how do people do qualification today? You probably build your ideal customer profile internally. You spend all these endless hours. You nail them down to like 5-8 questions where you can qualify a company. And now it's on you to go scout the internet and try to answer them. very time consuming, repetitive task. True, each company is different, but it's at the end of the day, you're trying to answer yes, no, I don't know, and compute a score with it. Same thing right now. You can go and get those answers within seconds, right? Instead of you doing that work as well. Personalizing email, right? Writing a whole sequence on one-to-one basis. If you want to do that well, I have to study the recipient online footprint, their LinkedIn activities, what they've done, all of that. Where do they fit in their company? What are their objections? What are their metrics? And I also have to customize my pitch to somebody, like to the recipient, which is also, you might argue, it's not one size fit all. It's very different. And things are getting a lot harder to do that today, because if the template and the sequences you're building are all getting trapped into spam. People know that it's fake. People know it's not personalized, no matter what you're trying to do. I can't tell you how many pitch I got, people telling me about the Seahawks because I live in Seattle, or the coffee shop down the street. I mean, that's a level of personalization which it's just not, it's not efficient, right? But it goes further than top of the funnel. Now you have a demo booked, okay? Well, also good salespeople, what do? They customize the pitch. They studied you before the demo, and they figure out what are your possible objection of a company of your size, of what you wrote online, or even after you studied, it could be somebody else done the discovery call originally, right? Well, that's a lot of information to sift through to go to a call. So what do they end up doing? They have the template, one size fit all. Well, AI now can also generate custom presentations, can give you key insights notes that, think of this as like a playbook you can most probably use, right? So it can surface all of that in front of you really efficiently. And now you are way more power to close a deal. So those are a few use cases, and there's a lot more to describe where AI can impact your sales activities.
I think the cool part about it is a lot of this is kind of nudging and assisting, enabling. It's not replacing. Like, you're not going to take everything that comes from the AI and just throw it out in front of somebody. If you do that, you've likely invested a lot of time, energy, and attention in designing the solution that you're delivering out there so that it works well, or you've fallen into the trap of, I'm just trying to do a lot. And then you get the stuff out there where it's like, hey, how about the Seahawks? Or the one that I get a lot lately is around how have I ever considered starting my own business? And it's like, I considered that for years up until 2015, and then did it and have been doing it since then. So like, come on.
It's like completely out of context.
Completely out of context. Like they don't have the background. So there are good ways, like any tool that is out there, these tools can be used for good or for bad things. Let's talk about what you're building. So let's share a little bit about where you're focusing time and energy and attention, and the specific problems that you're solving for in the marketplace with your business.
Yeah. Well, Truebase we're really focusing on top of the funnel today, right? Okay. So the experience is, you come, you describe your ideal customer profile. Maybe you share a few websites of who are the customers that bought from you, that churned, or that you would love to have them as a customer. And we work backward from that. We say, well, how can we find similar one? How can we help you qualify them? How can you personalize and find their contact information and engage with them? And the idea behind it is that you really put this all on autopilot, and it does it all for you. And then only when somebody engage, right, booked a meeting or replied positively, that's where a human is there with all the assisted information that they need to really get their job done. So Truebase is like your ticket to adopt generative AI efficiently on top of the funnel today.
How do you avoid the challenge of creating too much noise in the marketplace? Like, how does Truebase avoid creating more noise in the marketplace and stay focused?
Yeah, that's actually one of the main challenges that we come through, because like every time like I'll be pitching or talking to customer investors, be like,
yeah,
I've heard this before, I heard some of this before, right? And that's a challenge. That's today market. Now, we don't pay a lot of attention to the competition, but we're aware of them, so we go and like download products and play with demos or whatever.
sure.
And we're like, there is no level of like there's a lot of gap on what's being promised and what's out there. So
Right.
that's reality. We actually took a different approach because we're doing PLG, or we're kind of really targeting extreme PLG. We say we don't want to pitch anybody. We want to just say like, go try it on your own in the product. Last week, we were happy to say it's still unannounced, but I guess I'm announcing it right now here, but we'll see when this is going to air. Hopefully it'll be our public announcement, but we have self-serve, so people can go play with the product, understand how it works, and just see for themselves. And I think that's the ultimate way to differentiate in the market.
But so one of the challenges I've run into, and
Mm-hmm.
I demand gen is not my strength. Demand gen on a one-to-many perspective. I
Right.
lean on other partners to take care of that kind of stuff. And one of the there was a point where someone got a hold of me earlier this year. I took a cold call.
Mm-hmm.
There was enough context there where I was interested in the conversation and decided to test with them for a 90-day period and gave them the access to send emails out on my behalf. And then felt sick to my stomach watching the emails that were sent out, because they do not align with how we operate as a business and how I coach and develop folks.
With your brand, with your tone. Yeah.
It was to show you how bad it was. And it was cool to do the test. Like, it was worth the test. And there was really good stuff that we learned from the testing. But one of the subject lines that was suggested was quick question. And nobody wants to respond to a quick question kind of email. And so even there, where we're leaning on humans to do human work, it was bad human work at scale, and was creating more noise in the market and confusion, and create a poor reputation from my perspective than I want to have out in the marketplace. And fortunately, and this was also part of me just having fun with the test, fortunately, none of my friends got one of these emails and came back and said, or nobody put on LinkedIn and said, hey, Mike talks about this, but I got an email that looks like that.
Right.
So how do you avoid those situations when you're partnering with organizations, or you've got someone like me who'd like to be able to generate more demand on that side, but is also really concerned about creating noise in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's definitely a very delicate balance, right? Because we all have different voice and tone and brand, and we want to sustain that. And I definitely sympathize with all of that. Really going back to the co-pilot approach, right? You're a decision maker in this, right? So the way we built, so from workflow perspective, try it once, try it 20 times, try it 100 times, make sure it's flawless. And when you really get to that conviction, and hopefully you do, and we might not be able to get you there, then run it, automate it, and scale it. That part where you are in control and AI is co-piloting for you or assisting you, that's a magic moment. When it truly be like, oh my God, it really understands me. And part of my process on this, my building Truebase, is I work with a lot of sales coach, right? And I don't know if like sales coach are very critical. Like, I actually literally share my screen and I say, critique this email, critique this lead. What did we do wrong, right? And over time, where we're building this product and going back to how to use the hammer efficiently, right? So we figure out how to use it very efficiently at a certain point. And one of the biggest reward that that I'm proud of is that at a certain point, we've been told, this is better than something I can write. And if you're able to get there, and now you say, well, this is better than you can write, and we can do it at scale, that will be the win, right? So until you get there, definitely you should not automate and scale things, because your reputation is behind the line here.
Wissam, where can people go to find out more about what you're working on? Where do you want to send people from the podcast?
Yeah, well, Truebase.io is my company. On the About page, it has my email, it has my LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, but also Wissam@Truebase.io is my email. And I always enjoy critiques before the kudos. I'm always just love conversation. So please reach out and I will try to answer you as fast as I can.
Wissam, thanks for joining the podcast. If you know of somebody who would enjoy the conversation, please let Wissam and I know via LinkedIn. Those shares help. It helps to get the word out. It helps people who are struggling with a lot of these challenges to really demystify the challenge. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?